Good morning and thank you for joining us for State of Texas In Depth. I'm Josh Hinkle. This week we are taking a closer look at how the state spends your money. This week some lawmakers made a big decision, giving their blessing to a plan that keeps Texas-funded officers on the border with Mexico. The Legislative Budget Board okayed Governor Rick Perry's $86 million plan to keep Department of Public Safety troopers and National Guard troops on the border with Mexico. The money is being diverted from other accounts. For instance, the fund that pays down Texas Department of Transportation debt. Lower than expected interest rates mean that fund had money left over. While the board voted unanimously, some Democrats said they wish Texas taxpayers didn't have to foot the bill.
And when people are dealing with the spending limits and they are questioning whether or not we are spending too much, they need to know that we identified the priorities, this is the cost, and somebody has to pay the tab. And that happens to be the people in the state of Texas.
Under this plan, 1,000 National Guardsmen stationed in the Rio Grande Valley will return home by April. The state will replace those troops with a mix of state troopers and technology. Remember, this is a temporary plan. When Governor Perry's term ends in January, he supports continuing the surge until August. The next governor, Greg Abbott, could end the surge early if he chooses to. This week, both men spoke about the immigration debate nationally and here in Texas.
When the president announced orders to efficiently grant amnesty to millions of people in the United States illegally, if his first policy opened up the floodgates, there's no telling how much damage is going to be done by this executive action that he's taken now, particularly to border states.
The Constitution prescribes immigration policy be fixed by Congress, not by presidential fiat. The president's executive order and the actions of federal agencies to implement that executive order directly violate a fundamental promise to the American people.
To break down what all of this means for you and Texas taxpayers, I'm joined by Aman Batheja from our media partner, the Texas Tribune, and Bill Peacock from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a conservative think tank. Thank you both for being with us.
Sure.
So when we're talking about border funding, we had this $86 million that was approved by the Legislative Budget Board. Obviously, a lot of Republicans, conservative lawmakers have been pushing for this. What exactly will this do? I understand DPS, National Guard, it's kind of two separate ideas right now.
Well, the DPS will, hundreds of DPS officers will be funded at the border through the end of the fiscal year, which is August. National Guard troops will be there through March. And both Dan Patrick and Governor Perry have said they wanted it to be through August and were frustrated that it wasn't. It seems like Joe Straus was the reason this did not get pushed through the end of the fiscal year. And, you know, he's in an interesting position because he's negotiating with Governor Perry and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, and he's the only one who's still going to be here next year to deal with the consequences. And so he's said that he wants the legislature to decide what happens with border funding following this year.
And so what is going to happen?
I think there is a general interest in putting more resources towards the border. There's a question of whether you want to put National Guard troops or as many as there have been recently, and that's what's going to be debated. Steve McCraw with DPS, when he was testifying on Monday to the Legislative Budget Board, he told them that he wants to move from a saturation of people to a saturation of cameras. And so that suggests that maybe he won't be asking for National Guard troops next year. Maybe he won't be asking for as much. He wants to focus more on technology in monitoring the border.
When we talk about $86 million, does Texas really have that much to spend right now?
Well, you know, we look at it from that perspective. I mean, obviously this is an important issue for Texans, and we're coming out with a paper in the not too distant future kind of looking at things along the border, and there's some challenges down there that need addressing when it comes to border security. The key thing from our perspective, though, is that with Texas controlling what they spend, we have money to address these kind of issues, and that's why we've been working on budget issues generally.
There is the idea also that this, border surge will eventually have to come to an end, and Steve McCraw even said eventually it will come to an end, but how much longer can we keep funding and keep funding and keep funding?
Well, again, if we control spending in a lot of other areas like we're urging at the foundation, we'll have enough money to meet emergency spending needs, whether it's border security or whatever might come up.
You know, Sylvester Turner also said that suggested maybe this wasn't an emergency anymore, but you know, David Dewhurst, Rick Perry, they will tell you it is, of course, an emergency still. But at what point do we downgrade it from being an emergency item?
Well, and Steve McCraw with TPS did say that he thinks at some point it could be no longer an emergency. And frankly, I mean, there are people that have been asking for months now whether this still qualifies as an emergency when you have a lot of the migrants coming over the border are children. Is that something, maybe more resources are needed, but maybe not troops are what's needed, or just kind of what do we mean by emergency? And I think that's going to be discussed a lot next session of, you know, what do we want to do on the border as a state and as a country, and what the federal government should be doing versus what the state should be doing with its own resources.
You know, what do you predict that the legislature is going to try to do beyond this funding discussion right now when it comes to funding the border surge?
Well, as far as funding goes, I couldn't tell you, but we do look at this issue and from a state-based perspective. There's so much that Texas could do if the federal government would allow us to do, but yet the stalemate up in Washington, D.C. is kind of made everything, you know, just at a standstill, and it's causing problems.
All right, this is just one funding decision that they talked about this week. We will come back and talk about the growth in the state budget and also the spending cap. We'll tackle it all with our roundtable when In Session In Depth returns.